All right, so here we are. We have got my good buddy James Beaver with Envoy Mortgage. Thank you, James, for being here. This
Thanks for
is
having me.
Ryan in real estate, which I don't know if you ever watch YouTube, but we try to do information. Last week we actually did. Maybe you would like this. I probably got this information from you. What 5 things to do when your house doesn't appraise? And
Perfect. That's a
there's a
good
lot
one.
of I know I haven't actually had to deal with that much with you, so that's good. Also, make sure you're making the right price offer too. That your agent's doing that. But yeah, but this is the next episode, and we're talking. So I've had a lot of clients, James. The reason, by the way, if you need a good lender, I could not say anything better than James and his team at Envoy Mortgage.
Thank you.
Many of my clients have used him, and I haven't had one that's been like, I don't like those guys. They didn't service me well. He's going to do everything he can to get you approved services beyond any lender that I've ever met. And that's why I use them as one of my preferred lenders.
Thanks, Ryan.
So we'll put his number on this deal. So James, I brought you on today because I've had a lot of people. So a lot of my buyers are hesitant to buy because, and we all know that inventory is low, but they're hesitant to buy because they're like, am I buying at the top peak of the market, which is somewhat true. And so then the next question followed by that, but that doesn't mean it is the peak. It just means like we're kind of at the top. But the next question is, well, are we in a housing bubble? Is it going to pop? Am I going to buy? And all of a sudden I'm going to lose 20, 30% in value of my home. So
right.
I wanted to get your thoughts on that. And maybe before we get to the final answer of yes or no, maybe first tell us what creates a bubble per se, similar to what we've seen in the past, maybe 2006, that bubble or whatever.
Yeah, well, it's a great question and definitely a valid concern. Certainly hear people asking about it a fair amount. And with as hot as things have been the last couple of years, it's of course a natural question to wrestle with. Is the timing and where the price is now versus where it will be in the near future. There's lots of things that can create a bubble. I think in 2006, I had I went through that in this industry. I've been in this business through that season. So going back about 20 years. And so we saw that. I experienced it. There were some significant differences then as compared to what we see now. I think the biggest thing that really led to the housing bubble back then, it was supply and demand, of course, the fundamental component of anything where prices are going up. But at that point in time, lending guidelines were so much looser. I mean, if you had a pulse, you could get some kind of mortgage. Right. And so that created, because of the demand and the supply, that created an opportunity where just lots of people were jumping in and lots of people were getting loans. In many cases, they probably shouldn't have been able to, but it did drive pricing up. And when the bottom dropped out, it was because a lot of the fundamentals in lending really fell apart. That's changed significantly now. Guidelines are much more rigorous. I think that the government has done lots of things to prevent what we saw happen before happen again. Some of those probably are effective. Some of them probably are not. But I think one of the things they've done a good job of for the most part is protecting the quality of loans, which has made it a little more challenging to qualify and probably appropriately so. So that is one difference. When we saw bubble before, it was so loose just to get approval for loans.
Basically the regulations have gotten tighter, which has protected us from, I mean, what's that movie when
Big Short?
Big Short, yes. When they go interview that stripper, and she's like, I own 4 houses, and then he was like, call my office immediately at that moment. Well, let me ask you another question concerning that. So what about inflation? So we obviously are seeing record high inflation since like 20 years ago. What are we in 7% for this year?
Yeah, it's actually like 39 years. It's 39 years, I think, since we've seen a 12-month jump as aggressively as we saw in 2021. So pretty notable.
So how does the inflation affect? Because I hear a lot of that too. How does inflation affect potentially housing? And that, from what I've heard, there's a correlation between those two potentially.
Yeah, I think that there is. I think one of the things that we're focused on a lot related to inflation is what's happening with mortgage rates. And in an inflationary environment, you're going to see mortgage rates go up, which we're definitely seeing right now. That's happening as we speak, actually. So mortgage rates are going up. Mortgage rates have jumped about 0.5% since the beginning of the year. So it's the 18th of January, and so we've seen a pretty aggressive jump up in rates just in the last few weeks. That is definitely tied to inflation. My expectation, just for as a side note, is that as the Fed moves in and gets involved and starts to raise the overnight lending rate, that should tamper down on the inflationary environment. All other things being equal, which should probably cause mortgage rates to dip back down a little bit again. But so inflation definitely has an impact on the mortgage rate environment, and I think an indirect result on home pricing, right? Because as rates go up, that is going to people buy homes not really based on like what's the price of the home, but really what's the payment of the home, right? And so as rates go up, people can afford less, which should kind of even out pricing a little bit on homes, over time.
Right.
So
You're as far as just ask. As far as going back to the bubble question, you don't see a bubble as it was in 2006. You might just see we start to tamper down comparatively where we've been.
Yeah, no, I am not concerned about a housing bubble. Again, just because 2006 was a year where we saw a housing bubble, it's a good one to kind of look back on and see where the differences are. One notable element to think about is we have about 12 million more households now than we did in 2006, and about 2.5 million less homes available on the market. So there's some basic supply and demand issues there that I think will continue to keep homes. Certainly, I don't think there's going to be a bubble. I think we may see a diminished appreciation rate. Right. We saw a ton of appreciation last year, but just the basics of supply and demand. I think that we're likely to see housing continue to remain strong.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing with everything we're listing. We're still getting the top dollar, and it feels like there's less. We are in January, February, which is the worst. As far as like most inventory, it's the worst month of the year. Mm-hmm. But it feels like there's even less inventory than there was last year. But I do feel like I'm not having to be as competitive from buyers' perspectives with as many offers and crazy things, waiving appraisals and all that stuff like we were having to do last year. So who knows? So no bubble prediction. Yeah. What do you think mortgage rates will be in 6 to 12 months from now? 30-year fixed.
So I think in the short term, kind of get to your question, I think we'll probably see rates get up close to 4%, give or take a little.
So you don't think we're going to hit 5 this year?
Not currently, no.
Okay.
I do not think that. And I do think that we'll see rates begin to drop in the second half of the year, probably back down in the right now, kind of the people I'm reading up on and following and things like that, experts that are higher up the food chain than I am. I think what we'll probably do is we'll probably get back down toward the low 3s in the back half of the year. Threw out my crystal ball in 2008, shortly after the 2006 bubble. So I don't know what'll happen, but I think a lot of signs indicate, well, historically, we've seen the Fed step in when we have, there's 2 or 3 or 4 instances in the last handful of decades where we see a rapid inflationary environment, like inflation jumps up pretty significantly in a short period of time. The Fed steps in, they raise the overnight lending rate, and it does work, and rates then end up dropping. So my expectation is, as you hear more and more about the Fed raising the rate, right, then inflation will begin to drop, and the bond market will respond, and mortgage rates will probably dip back down. So I would think we'll probably be in the probably low 3s the back half of the year, but maybe up into give or take 4% range in the first half of the year.
So if you're a buyer, really, this year is still a great year to buy. I remember 2-3 years ago we were in 5.5%. So it's still, if you're under 4, it's still a great time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is historically, we're still looking at excellent interest rates. Excuse me. And I think one thing to think about is if you're trying to go ahead and buy a home and you're concerned that rates may be a little bit higher here at the beginning of the year, my advice to you would be to keep your fee structure lower on your mortgage. So sometimes you will pay points, additional fees to get a lower interest rate. I would tend to say, hey, look, maybe not pay more in fees Okay, just go ahead and keep your fee structure lower. That way it'll make more sense for you economically if a refinance opportunity were to pop up in the next, 6 to 12, 18 months. If you pay less in fees, you're going to have a higher rate, but if rates dip, then you can take advantage of that by refinancing potentially. So
Got it.
that's something to think about.
And then my last question, I know you got to go.
Mhm.
If you were going to refinance, what's a general rule of thumb? So say someone's at 5%, what interest rate does it need to be at to make it worth it in cost and all that?
Well, that really is dictated by the size of your loan.
Okay.
Right. So a small loan, it's going to take a lot longer to break even, because the reality is this: when you refinance, uh, a good chunk of the closing costs are about the same, whether you have $100,000 mortgage or an $800,000 mortgage.
Right.
Title insurance being the primary exception. And so the bigger your loan, what I would tell people is if you feel like you can break even in around a couple of years, and you feel like you're going to own the home, like you're very confident you're going to own the home for at least that amount of time, then it's something that's worth looking at. One of the things that we show people is how much are you going to save, netting out costs and everything over any period of time you want to look at. And so it makes them, it kind of distills the math down to a more digestible number to think about.
Right. But if they're sitting at a 5.5%, 6.5% rate, let's go ahead and get refinanced, right?
Yeah.
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 Hey,
it's generally worth looking at, Ryan.
Yes. Hey, thank you so much, very much. We'll have you do this again sometime with our great lender, James Beaver. See you next time.
Thanks, pal.
Buddy.
See you, man.